I had distributed the outline on Habakkuk, and it was my intention to pursue that today. And I got up this morning thinking about a situation I'm going to address that we are facing in this church, and my mind just stuck there, and the wheels started spinning, and I'm going to speak to that situation. I've done that before, and it's always ended up being the best thing to do. I talked to Jeannie yesterday, and she heard from the head guy at the county, Mr. Kench, the head of the mental health. And at first he had apologized to her for what they've been through with Shannon and said it shouldn't have happened. And they had a board meeting on Monday where they all got together to see what could be done. And this is what he has told her. There is no place for Shannon. There is no rehab center. There is no group home. The only thing they will offer is for the county to pay for 8 hours a day for staff in their home, which throws 2/3 of the day onto Gene and Dennis. They are not able to continue to bear that load. And I can tell you this from their experience, that 8 hours of staff, good luck if they even show up. Good luck if they even show up, which could throw the whole bulk of the thing on them. So Shannon is stuck at the hospital, and there is nowhere at this point for him to go. And so the question is, where do we go from here? I have said that one thing we may need to do is get on television and just get the news to shine a light on it. Bring community awareness to it. If we have to fight to get to the governor's desk and do whatever we need to do, I don't know. I don't know how to even start that process. Shannon's caseworker is irate that this is happening, but what she can do, I don't know. But I do know this, that the arm of flesh has failed us.
Yes.
We should not be shocked when the arm of flesh fails us. And so I want to talk to this situation today. I threw together some outlines that I've done on subjects like this in the past. None of this is organized. This is just going to kind of be what comes up, comes out, ad lib. And so if it lacks organization or cohesion, then you'll know why. Because I only thought of this shortly before I left to come to church, and it just so seized me. I guess you could say, Gene and Dennis, this sermon is for you, but it's really for all of us. Because if we understand the Church of the Lord Jesus Christ the way we ought to, we're a body. And Paul teaches in 1 Corinthians 12, when one member suffers, we all suffer with it. And I know as a shepherd, because that's what a pastor is by definition, a shepherd, I care for the sheep. And what touches you touches me. And I wouldn't be worth my salt as a pastor if it were otherwise. And so we're all in this together. Again, this is just going to be what comes out. I could eliminate this burden from my life very easily. I could just say, to hell with it. I'm tired of the drama. I'm tired because, listen, this is just one thing. This church has got so much drama. I wonder, what are we doing wrong? But I have a sneaking suspicion that every church is packed full of drama.
You got that right.
If the Woods were not part of my life, they were out of the church for about 11 years. And they came back. Had they not come back, this wouldn't have been my problem. I wouldn't be dealing with this. But I want to tell you something. Even though now I have this problem, and yes, it is my problem because it's their problem and I'm their pastor and I care about them. Thank God they came back.
Amen.
I'm happy to have them back. And they've been good and supportive members. And with all they have to deal with, they have been serving members. When Lee lay dying, Jeannie was taking food over there with all she had to deal with at home, Shannon. She found time to reach out to help somebody else. And they are that kind of people. And I'm so happy to have them back, and I'll take them back. You see, part of this that I'll speak for myself that I am going through is because I have made the same choice that Moses made. When I read in Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 24, by faith Moses, when he was come to years, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season. I could get up here and say, I've had it. I'm done. I'm old enough to retire. I've got Social Security. I've saved over the years for the day when I can't do this job. I'm done. I'm out of here. I'm going to spend the rest of my life doing what a lot of retired people do, taking it easy and having fun. But if I abandoned this ministry and this church for that, there would be pleasure, yes, but it would be the pleasure of sin, because I'd be sinning to do it. So I will choose rather to suffer affliction with the people of God, because I would rather be connected to you and suffer affliction with you and die and go to heaven than to be with the happy, peppy, happy people out there in the world that are going to die and go to hell because they care nothing for Israel's God or the people of God. They care only about this world and their lives and their own personal fun. What makes all of this so hard is because we do love, because we do care, and because we understand as Christians it is our duty to have compassion.
Yes.
What does the Lord require of thee? To love mercy.
Yes.
To not only have mercy,
yes,
and compassion on the weak and the hurting and the suffering, but also to love it, to identify with it. If I didn't love these people, if I didn't care about these people, then what difference would it make? But it is precisely because we love, because we care, that this hurts and this is hard. But do you realize that loving and caring and having mercy and compassion after the example of our God, who was full of mercy and compassion, is an evidence that we are His children and bear His likeness? Because He cares for the suffering and He has compassion for the hurting. How do I know? I've read the Gospels of what He did when He was here among us. And the character of His ministry was mercy and compassion. Now there is one thing. So the question is, facing a situation like this, how do we deal with it? What do we do? What do you say to a situation like this, where we've reached this brick wall and we don't know what to do, we don't know where to turn, we don't know where to go from here other than to turn to God and wait? That's all we know. And I'll speak to that momentarily if my mind remembers it to come around to it. But when you look at a situation like this, where one of the things that makes this so problematic for us is we believe in God. And believing in God, we believe He's omniscient. That is, we believe He knows what is going on here. None of this takes Him by surprise. It never has. He's known from all eternity we would reach this moment. So He knows about it. Number two, He's almighty. He can certainly fix it.
Yes.
If He could create this universe, and He did, if He can maintain it, and He did, if He can feed the teeming billions upon billions of living creatures, human and animal, on it, and He does, and if He could raise the dead body of His Son from the grave, and He did, He can certainly solve this problem. It's not a question of His power, nor it is a question of His know-how, because He's infinitely wise. He knows how to fix this. And then this is where it really gets to the rub. He's also good. And this situation that we look at and we say this is so bad, in no way impugns the fact that God is infinitely good. He's too good to be mistaken, to do something wrong. He's too wise to be mistaken. He's too knowing to be ignorant, and He's too powerful to be helpless. So the $64 question is, given what we know about our God, why doesn't He do something? He is.
That's right.
And it doesn't follow that He won't do anything yet. He just has not done now what we so much, so desperately want Him to do now. He's waiting. Now, if there was no God, we could say, well, just, since He hasn't stepped up to the plate to deal with this situation, then maybe all of this stuff about God and Christianity is just a pipe dream. It's just some myth. Really, there's no God at all. Well, then if there's no God at all, where's the tragedy in this situation? Pray tell. Why would we even care? Pray tell. If we're all just a cosmic accident, then really we are no different than a stick out there that gets in our way. And what do you do with a stick that gets in your way? Just kick it aside and move on. If there is no God, then what would be wrong by fixing the problem this way? Just somebody go over there with a gun and shoot him and end it and we're done. And there have been godless atheistic people that have been that cruel to eliminate what they considered menacing problems in society. This is the way Hitler handled it, if I've got my history right. He eliminated the weak and the insane and the infirm, so they wouldn't be a drain on the public purse, so that he could affirm his ideal of the superior Nordic race. It is precisely that because there is a God, because there is such a thing as love and mercy and compassion and what we believe about our God, that causes us to look at this situation in the way that we do. Now, there is one thing, we can either look at this and process this through the terms of our faith, or we can say, you know what, I'm done with God. In the hour of my need, He wasn't there for me. He didn't deliver for me when I needed Him to deliver for me. So you know what, I'm done with Him. I'm just going to go out and do my thing. You know what? If Shannon made that choice, or Gene and Dennis made that choice, or we made that choice, it is entirely possible that this situation would get better. You say, how do you come at that? I'll tell you how. Because Satan is the god of this world. And when you do what he wants, one of the ways he encourages you with that is he gives you the goodies he has to give in this world. Proof? The temptation of Jesus Christ. Satan comes and says, fall down and worship me. He says, he shows him all the kingdoms of this world and the glory of them in a moment of time. And he says, you fall and worship me, and I'll give you all of this, for it's mine to give to whomever I will. And Jesus said, it is written, thou shalt worship the Lord thy God, and him only shalt thou serve. So it's possible that if we just gave up and bowed the knee to Satan, it might get better. All of a sudden, a great place might open up, and Shannon might get great care. And we might think, well, yeah, that church was the problem all along. I knew it deep down. Now I know it for sure. But let me tell you something. If you are a child of the living God, and you make a choice like that, it might get better for a while, but inevitably, you are going to feel the rod. you are going to feel the rod. God may let you have your little playhouse for a while, but inevitably, it will come crashing down on you. You can go read Jeremiah chapter 44. And Jeremiah was preaching to the people against their idolatry. They had been worshiping the Queen of Heaven, and here was their reasoning. When we worship the Queen of Heaven, it was better. But ever since we've ceased worshiping her and offering to her our cakes and our drink offerings, things have gotten worse. So we're going to go back and do that when it was better. And so they did. And it only got worse and worse until it eventuated in the horrors of the destruction of Jerusalem by the Babylonian army and a 70-year captivity that was horrible. And if you don't think it wasn't horrible, worse than anything we're looking at right now, far and more worse than anything we're looking at right now, go read the book of Lamentations.
Yes.
I'm saying if we are the people of God and we make a choice like that, yeah, we might prosper for a little while, but somewhere down there the judgment is going to come crashing. And if it does not, we're in worse trouble yet.
You got that right.
Because Hebrews chapter 11 says, if you be without chastening whereof all are partakers, then are ye bastards and not sons. If you can walk away from God and walk away from His Word and walk away from His truth, and your life gets good and it stays good to the end, you're going to drop into hell. And I can tell you that on the authority of the Word of God. So you look at this, so what I'm saying is, what's to be gained by denying God is there? Nothing. Nothing. So here we are with this almighty, all-knowing, all-merciful, all-good, all-wise God, and this situation, we're up against a brick wall, and right now, He's not doing anything, or so it looks to us. Or so it looks to us. Because you see, we don't know what He's doing.
That's right.
Because we don't have infinite knowledge of what could be going on right now. But why doesn't God save Shannon? Stop. God has saved
That's right.
Shannon
That's right.
with the greatest salvation that can be had. That is the salvation of the forgiveness of his sins and the fact that whatever he is suffering now is temporary, and when his life is over, it's done for him, and he goes where he leaps for joy on the other side. Again, my thoughts are not organized, so let me go here with this. One thing I'll say about Shannon, for the handicap that he's had, when he has been able, he has lived life to the fullest he could live it. He's gone bowling. He's played bocce ball. He even went to England one time in a tournament. He has taken college classes. He's gone places. He's done things. He even tried to get jobs, but there were no jobs for people in his condition. When he was able, he lived life. He confessed faith. He joined the church.
Amen.
He has thoroughly loved it when he's been able to get up here and be the worship leader. Or when he's had the opportunity to pass the communion elements. A seemingly small service, but for him a delight to be able to serve at all. I'll give it to him when he could. But now his condition has deteriorated where he is less and less able to do, requiring more and more. But let me say that to his credit. Now, there's several things we can say about this. But, again, this is kind of around all over the place, so you'll have to bear with me. I just grabbed some outlines of subjects I've done in the past. I can tell you what makes this, one of the things that makes this particularly difficult, is this thing of the unknown. I've noticed in dealing with people over the years, pretty well they can deal with anything if they know what they're dealing with. If you have a loved one and they're dangling between life and death, and one day you think they're going to live and one day you think you're going to die, that is a terrible pendulum to be swinging between. And I notice when they finally die, that actually is easier to deal with than the unknown of whether they're going to live or die, because now you know what you have to deal with and you deal with it. The known is easier to deal with than the unknown. And the problem here is there are so many unknowns. And it's harder to deal, and it appears harder for us to deal with the known unknown than the unknown unknown. The unknown that we don't know, we don't deal with because we don't know what's there to deal with. It's that thing we don't know that causes us so much problem. And boy, this is where Satan likes to capitalize on us, because he loves to play up the unknown to eat away at the vitals of our faith, because faith is what withstands the devil. So what we have to do, brethren, in these times when we face the unknown, we have to go back and we have to look at what we know. I remember watching Who Done It one time, and they were supposed to investigate some kind of a mystery case. And there was one thing that the detectives said that I never forgot. Stayed with me. They had all these things they didn't know about this case. And the detective says, we begin with what we know. And in everything we deal with in life, we start out with what we know. And that's where we have to start out here. There's a lot about this situation I don't know. And I've learned that if I'm going to have peace with Christ, I have to learn to live with what I don't know and what I don't understand. We will never understand it. Have we not read, do we not read in Isaiah chapter 40? In Isaiah chapter 40 and verse 28, hast thou not known, hast thou not heard, that the everlasting God, the Lord, the Creator of the ends of the earth, fainteth not, neither is weary? There is no searching of His understanding. You and I will never be able to fathom God's understanding of situations. In fact, the Bible says that His judgments are past finding out. We can never find out all God's reasons for deciding to do or not do what He does. It's past us. So if we're going to walk in peace with God, we have got to walk in peace with the fact that there's a lot we don't understand. And I have come to the point in my life where very often the best answer I have for people when they're in these situations like this is, I do not understand why it is this way, but I know the one who does.
Yes.
And I have to leave it there. And this is exactly what Paul is telling us in Philippians chapter 6 when he says, be careful for nothing. Don't stress out over everything. But with prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God, and the peace of God that passeth all understanding shall keep your minds and hearts through Christ Jesus. The peace that God gives is a peace that is not limited to what I can figure out and understand. It passes understanding. I can have it when I don't know. Philip Yancey, talking about, said sometimes the reason God doesn't give us the answer is He knows we couldn't handle it.
Yeah.
So He withholds it from us. I've often reminded you, and I will remind you again, that in the book of Job, God never told Job why he was suffering what he did. Lost every kid he ever had. Lost every kid he had. He got 10 more later. But up to that point, he lost all of his children in violent deaths. He lost all of his property. And then he got down and he said, the Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And then God smote him with a terrible disease. He had boils, top of his head, tip of his toe, scraping himself with potsherd. I mean, the man was in dire straits. God took his health away from him. And then after that, his friends come along and they do the best thing they could possibly have done. They sat there for 7 days in silence and wept.
Yes.
What do you say to a guy like that? Sometimes the best thing you can do is just listen in silence and weep with them. But then they tried to figure out why it happened.
Yeah.
So they open their big mouths to give the explanation as to why they think Job's in this case. And what they basically, it comes down to is, Job, you're in this situation because of something bad you did. And he said, miserable comforters are you all. And Job wanted his day in court. Job didn't feel like he deserved this. And he wanted to stand before God and argue his case. And he got his day in court, but God spoke first. He says, you're going to justify yourself, condemn me to justify yourself? You think you know so much, Job, as to question my doings? And what he did is he began to ask him bunches and bunches of questions about his work as a creator and sustainer of this great, massive universe. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? If you think you know so much as to question why I do what I do, now you answer that question, would you? And he goes on and he asks him questions like that. Who's begotten the rain? Where does that come from, Job? When the hinds calve and there's no man around to help out, who makes that happen? And on he goes with questions like this. Until finally Job says, I spoke when... Well, I'll just tell you what he said. Over in Job chapter 42, he finally came to this point. And notice that up to this point, God has not explained to him why this happened. Yeah. We know what was going on. There was a contest between God and the devil. The devil said, you take everything he's got and he'll curse you to your face. Yeah. You take away his health, he'll curse you to your face. There's no record that God ever told Job that was what was going on. He just answered him with the declaration of his power, of his wisdom. Then Job answered the Lord and said, I know that thou canst do everything. And you know what? This situation we're in with Shannon right now doesn't change that one iota.
That's right.
God can still do everything. Just because he doesn't do what I think he ought to do right now doesn't mean that his power is exhausted. This isn't a question of God's power. This is a question of God's will, rooted in his understanding, his wisdom, and his goodness that is beyond our ability to search it out. See, let's go back to what we know. This is where we'll find our solace. Not in what we don't know, but in what we know. And this we know. I know that thou canst do everything, and that no thought can be withholden from thee. Who is he that hideth counsel without knowledge? Therefore I have uttered that I understood not. Things too wonderful for me which I knew not. Here I beseech thee, and I will speak. Okay, now he's got his day in court, and he's going to speak. I will demand of thee, and declare thou unto me. Okay, I've got my chance now, my day in court. I've heard thee by the hearing of the ear, but now mine eye seeth thee. Now here's what I've got to say. Wherefore I abhor myself, and repent in dust and ashes. The truth of the matter, being the sinner he was, Job deserved everything that happened to him and more. And so do we.
That's right.
Every ache, every pain, every grief, every loss you complain of, you deserve, and more. If we all got what we really deserve, we'd be burning in hell right now. And so would Shannon. The truth of the matter is, Shannon deserves what's happening to him. Gene and Dennis deserve what's happening to them. We deserve what's happening to us. And the best attitude that we can develop in the face of things like this is expressed in the book of Ezra, chapter 9. And this is on the heels of the horrible suffering that nation had experienced at the hands of Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonian army, like I say, vividly described in the book of Lamentations. And he says in verse 13 of Ezra 9, and after all that has come upon us for all our evil deeds and for our great trespass, seeing that our God has punished us less than our iniquities deserve, and has given us such deliverance as this. That's the truth. We deserve far more than anything that's being dished at us right now. And so does he. I cannot stand here and tell you, I don't know. I don't know. I'm not God. But I cannot stand here and tell you that this might not be the chastening hand upon Shannon. Because Shannon has not always appreciated what he's had like he should. Shannon's had trouble with his temper. Shannon's had trouble with his mouth. I know. I've caught the brunt of it. And yet, I've seen that same man humble himself down as humble as he can get and apologize. And you know what I've done? I have forgiven him. Amen. You know why I have forgiven him? I have to. Because my Bible says if I don't forgive men their trespasses against me, then God's not going to forgive me. And nothing, no indignity done against me compares to anything I've done to my God. Whatever 100 talents is owed to me by any fellow sinner, I owe God 10,000. You bet I forgive. And I forgive again. How many times the Bible says, do you forgive your brother when he offends? 7 times? No, Jesus said 7 times 70. I haven't had to do that to Shannon. It hasn't even come close to counting up to that. To say nothing of the fact that he has cerebral palsy, and Jean and Dennis have been told by mental health professionals that people with cerebral palsy have extra problems controlling their emotions. And this doesn't factor in the provocations of lazy ass kids that don't want to work, that hire in and want to sit there and play on those phones rather than do their job. You put yourself in Shannon's shoes. You lie there. You can't feed yourself. You can't toilet yourself. You can't bathe yourself. You can't do anything. And maybe you want to play cards to pass the time. And this happened. And the person that's being paid to caretake you, I don't want it. I don't want it. Because all they want to do is play on those stupid phones that I hate with a passion that will not quit. I mean, it's not like there hasn't been times when he's been provoked. I'm not justifying anger, but you know there is some guilt that falls on the one that provokes it, as well as the one that reacts with the provocation. I mean, you think about Shannon's life. There is nothing wrong with Shannon's mind. His mind is as good as anybody else's mind in this church. But here is a perfectly sound mind imprisoned in a body that mind cannot control. Shannon has lived his entire life as helpless as a newborn babe. If you were to take him and lock him in a room and just leave him, just like a baby, he would thirst to death, starve to death in his own dung and urine, and you think you got problems. That's exactly what would happen to him. In some ways, Shannon can act very much like a child. But if you think about it, he's lived his whole life like a child. He's never had a choice to live it any other way. So obviously, you're going to see that from time to time. He has not been able to have the kind of life experience we've had to mature his mind to the level that ours is matured. You know what the tragedy in all of it is, though? How many adults with their minds and faculties I see acting like little spoiled brats and children. Including the one that's talking to you. And so, there's that. It could be that God is chastening Shannon. And if it is, you know why? It's because God loves him. Amen. That's why. Amen. And so that gives you some hope. When I look at a situation like this, I think about the children of Israel. And again, I'm not saying that's what it is. It's just like when I did that sermon on television and I talked about all the sickness and the ailment in the church. And I said, I don't know that it's this, but in faithfulness, I've got to let you know that it could be. Because maybe we're not keeping the Lord's Supper with the way that we should. Maybe there's unconfessed, unjudged sin in our lives. And that's why there's many that are weak and sickly among us. And in their case, many slept. Many died because of that. I'm not saying that that's the reason, but I have to be faithful and let you know that it could be. And we ought to all be searching our hearts to make sure it's not that. That's why He tells us to judge and examine ourselves, to make sure that we keep the account clear. I mean, there's all kind of things we know about this, even though we may not know the specifics of why. We know that one thing this does is it weans us from our love of this world. Yes. And it teaches us to seek our happiness and ultimate happiness in the next. We know that it can cause us to stop and examine ourselves. It can work conviction for sin. It can be a punishment, not necessarily. And sometimes when we've got something like this in our life, it causes us to be more careful not to sin. That's right. Like Jesus said when He healed somebody, He said, "Go and sin no more, lest the worst thing befall thee." Sometimes it works as a preventative. I remember Greg Oley after he had his surgery. You know, why does a man like Greg Oley walk around with a growing stage 4 colon cancer? I don't have the answer to that question. But I can tell you this, after he had surgery, he sat and he told me, you know, in one way, I don't want this to go away. You know why? Because he could see how it was prompting him to get closer to God. That's it. And if it has that effect, it's having a good effect if it's causing him to get closer to God. And sometimes things like this reveal latent corruption in us. It brings out an underlying selfishness or envy or bitterness or whatever. And when we see that corruption rising up, then we know we need to cut it out. Plus, it gives the opportunity for the exercise of our graces, to be patient, long-suffering, and yet not let it affect our joy in the Lord. And when those fruits are abounding in our lives and manifest in our lives, we have our evidence that we're the children of the living God. So even in things like this, good things come out of it, if it's processed properly. Because I've said so often with the difficulties of life, it's not so much the thing itself, it's how you react to it. Which brings me to a next point. Like I say, this is kind of hodgepodge. I know it doesn't have a lot of organization to it. It's sort of like my Aunt Nell. What comes up, comes out. Whatever I happen to think of at the moment, that's what you're going to get, because this one didn't get all planned out. Mighty quiet in here, though. I think I may be talking to somebody. We know a lot of this stuff, but we need to come back and be reminded. We need to go back. When we're facing these unknowns, we need to go back to what we know. And let me throw this one in there. And this bears realizing. Right now, Shannon's home is a hospital room that he can't get out of. That's his home right now. He doesn't know where home will be in this world after this, if ever after this. But the beautiful thing about it is this. Shannon does have a home in the Father's house above. That's right. There is that one solution, that the good Lord just might in mercy say, my child has suffered enough, come home. And you know what? My Bible tells me that would be far better. That's it. If I believe it. Maybe this is the Lord getting Shannon ready for that. I don't know. I'm saying these are possibilities. And knowing these are possibilities give us reason to hold to our faith. I remember one time Shannon went in for a surgical procedure. It's a little comical. And I went in to pray for him before he underwent the procedure. And as I'm often wont to do, because you never know what's going to happen in surgery, you know, thanking God for our home in heaven and for our hope, and that when we leave this world, we have a better place to go. I'm done praying. Shannon says, why are you praying about dying? I know Steve was saying, you know something I don't know? No, Shannon, we hope you come out of this. And he did. It was a hard pass, but he did. But you know, I think his attitude about that's beginning to change. That's not all bad. In fact, if he were to stop his medications, and there may come a point when he chooses to do this. One of the things that can happen, because one of the things that takes out cerebral palsy patients are seizures. And Shannon was starting to have seizures. So he's on anti-seizure medication, which makes him very groggy.
You got that right.
And that's why sometimes when you talk to Shannon, it's hard to understand him. He has trouble anyway, because Shannon, his condition, he does not have control of his muscles. You'll notice how his eyes kind of dance around. One of the sad things, and this definitely hinders Shannon's ability to grow as a Christian, is Shannon cannot read a book. He cannot focus his eyes to read a book. Any Bible Shannon gets is Bible that's read to him, because he can't read it. And he can't feed himself. He doesn't have the control of his muscles. That's the tragedy of this thing. And, where was I going to go with that? I don't even know. It's completely slipped my mind where I wanted to go with that. Oh, but that is a thing that's hindered his growth. And, anyway, the seizures. That's what I was saying. So he takes this anti-seizure medication, which makes it more difficult to understand him when he talks, because not only does he have the problem of not having the motor control of his vocal cords and mouth and tongue that we have, but that's exacerbated by the fact that these anti-seizure medications make him groggy. He's apologized to me for falling asleep in church. I say, Shannon. Now, stop. Does that tell you something about Shannon Wood? Does that tell you anything about Shannon Wood, that he would apologize to his pastor for falling asleep in church because he knows it's the right thing to stay awake and listen to the preacher preach? He has a conscience about that. That speaks well. And I said, Shannon, you're here. You presented your body a living sacrifice. That goes to his credit. If he were to stop taking those anti-seizure medicines, he could have a seizure. They could take him out. But a seizure is not something you want to experience. You can understand anybody not wanting to have a seizure. But there could come a time when he might opt to say, I don't want the medicine anymore. That was exactly the decision Pearl made. There is a difference, people, between taking life and letting nature take its course. Understand the difference. If your body's trying to die and you decide to just let it die, that's one thing. But killing yourself is another.
That's right.
But that is an option that people have when they've got something like that, of saying, Pearl just got tired of the revolving door, in and out of the hospital, going backwards, and she finally just said, I'm done. She quit the medicine. And that stubborn old woman, it took her forever to die. Pearl was tough. But she finally did. God rest her soul and bless her memory. But anyway, I think part of this could be reconciling him to that, should that be what God has in mind for him now. But there is this, again, hodgepodge all over the place. Turn over to Exodus 15. And again, we don't know. We don't know what the Lord might yet do that would open a door for him, provide a place. We don't know. I'm just trying to tell you this morning how to cope with the unknown. The children of Israel, they've come out of Egypt after Egypt has been broken by 10 plagues. And here they are. And the funny thing is, Pharaoh and his cohorts make the decision that they made a mistake in letting Israel leave. So he gets his army together and his chariots and horses, and they go chasing after him. So here the children of Israel, they've come to the Red Sea, and there it is in front of them, an impassable barrier. And Pharaoh's hosts are pursuing behind, and they're sandwiched in, and there's nowhere to go. There's nothing they can do. But you know what they do? In that sandwiched in, difficult, impossible looking situation, they did the thing we so often do. They griped. And they say to Moses, in Exodus chapter 14, they say to him, in verse 10, when Pharaoh drew nigh, the children of Israel lifted up their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians marched after them. And they were sore afraid, and the children of Israel cried out unto the Lord. And they said unto Moses, because there were no graves in Egypt, hast thou taken us away to die in the wilderness? Wherefore hast thou dealt thus with us, to carry us forth out of Egypt? Is not this the word that we did tell thee in Egypt, saying, let us alone, that we may serve the Egyptians? For it had been better for us to serve the Egyptians than that we should die in the wilderness. You know the funny thing? The Egyptians regretted that they had let the Israelites go. Now the Israelites regretted that they left.
You got that right.
Isn't that odd? They're both regretting it. I mean, if the Israelites had had their way, they would have greeted Pharaoh's armies with a handshake. Let's patch up our differences and go back home. And did you know this was a provocation that provoked God? This angered God. And when the children of Israel, in Numbers chapter 13, 14, the Lord finally had enough of their griping. And He said, that's it. They kept saying, you've brought us out here to die in this wilderness. Well, it sounds like you got this thing about dying in the wilderness. So guess what? You're going to get just what you thought you were going to get. You're going to die in this wilderness. And you know what He charged them with? The book of Numbers. We talked about that this week, Numbers. And He gives you the number 10 times. 10 times you've provoked me. It was 10 times too many. And God said, I've had it. You're dying in this wilderness. And in the list of those 10 provocations, in that list is this. Right here. They didn't trust God when they were at the brink of the Red Sea. And it angered God, and He wrote it down in the little book of the provocations that finally eventuated in their dying in the wilderness. Now let me say this. That was their punishment. Sometimes, brethren, God punishes us because of our whining and our griping to spend our days, the rest of our days, in the wilderness missing God's best.
You got that right.
But these were God's children, and I can prove that. So I'm just going to say this. I would rather die in the wilderness, go to heaven, than die in a palace and go to hell.
You got that right.
The wilderness journey, as hard as it was, for 40 long years, was a blessing because it showed God loved them and chastened them and didn't let them get away with their brat fits. But they pitched this little brat fit. And Moses said unto the people, fear not. Stand still and see the salvation of God, which He will show you today. For the Egyptians whom ye have seen today, ye shall see them again no more forever. The Lord shall fight for you, and ye shall hold your peace. Two things. The first thing is Moses tells them, fear not. Commenting on this, I have said, and I know I taught this in Pennsylvania recently, so John, you get a review here. And you people in Sarnia, I taught it to you, so you get a review here. I'm sure you remember everything I said, so just bear with me. While they were awaiting the outcome of this situation, here was Moses' exhortation to them. He said, fear ye not. Every problem we face has a psychological dimension. And if we deal with that dimension, it may not make the problem go away, but it will sure make it a lot easier to bear. If we deal with the psychological dimension, and that's just what He's telling him to do. He says, fear not. Matthew Henry said it is our duty and our interest when we cannot get out of our troubles, yet we can get above our fears. And the antidote to fear is faith.
Amen.
Why are ye so fearful, said Jesus. How is it you have no faith? And I've gone through, when I've done this study, I've started at Genesis and I've gone all the way through the book of Revelation, and I've given you some of the many places where God says, fear not, fear not, fear not, be not afraid, fear not, fear not, fear not, be not afraid. So that's the one dimension that can be changed. And any problem we face is a psychological dimension. How we perceive it, how we react to it. And God says, don't react with fear. Because we have seen the end of the arm of man does not mean we've seen the end of the arm of God. We must remember that. And so in the face of this situation in which they're sandwiched in and there's nothing they could do, this is not a situation that would be where they would gain a point by fighting or fleeing. They were not ready for war. There was no way to flee. There was nothing they could do. That's just it. There was nothing they could do. And so Moses gives them this piece of advice. This worn, age-old piece of advice that so often is the only piece of advice I have to give. I'm a man of God. I represent God to you. Kevin said in his prayer, in praying for me this morning, referred to me as an ambassador. And that's exactly what the Bible calls a minister of the gospel in 2 Corinthians 5. And I beseech you in Christ's stead. Jesus organized it that instead of coming down himself every Sunday personally to stand in the pulpit, he appoints the likes of a little me to stand here in his stead and speak for him. And this is my primary message, and it's the message I have for this situation. Be ye reconciled to God. But one piece of advice I have to give, and I know it sounds so lame, it sounds so weak, because I'm a fix-it guy. If there's a way to fix it, I want to fix it. But I've learned there's some situations in life I cannot fix. Sorry, folks. I hate to disappoint you, but I am not God. And so the best that I have to give in some situations is the same that Moses said to these people. Stand still and see. In other words, wait and see.
That's right.
Pastor, can't you do any better than that? Sometimes, no. That's the best I've got for you. Wait and see the salvation of the Lord. Just wait and watch and see what He does. Sometimes that's all I can tell you. But I've got this going for that piece of advice. At least I've got book, chapter, and verse for it. And that says a lot, because that's really, people, in the end, the best I can do for you is give you what God said, and then you can take that and draw comfort from it or not. So about the best I can say in a situation like this is wait and see. Wait and see the outcome. Now, when Gene and Dennis could, they gave Shannon the best care a person in his condition could ever want to have. Ever want to have. Excellent care. That's part of the problem. Because Shannon all these years has had the best of the best, which makes less look unacceptable. And we could stand here and say, and I don't doubt they wouldn't even deny this, that part of what makes this so difficult for Shannon is they spoiled him with the best of the best. They spoiled him. Now, don't think that that means that they didn't ever lock heads with him, because they have. Jeannie told me years ago when he was a little guy, she said, I beat his butt. And they did just exactly what they ought to do. Sometimes if he was a brat, just turn him over, just like you should do with any bratty kid when they're coming along. But yeah, you could say maybe they spoiled him. But you know what? Don't you dare judge them when you haven't been where they were.
Amen.
When in your child, and you watch your child so helpless, and you're a compassionate person with a mother's love, don't you stand here and pontificate, well, they shoulda. In other words, don't you be a Job's friend. You don't know what you would have done if it had been you in that situation. So here we are. And like I say, I could eliminate it for me as far as a problem for me. I could just walk away from the whole thing. But you know, I serve Jonah's God, and I'm scared of him. I knew one guy that didn't want to deal with the ministry. And that was Jonah. And he ran away. And he ended up in a whale's belly and ended up puked up on the floor, puked up on the shore, drenched in whale vomit. And I personally am too fastidious to want to go there. So I'm not going to try that. We're in this together. Amen. This is a wonderful opportunity for you people. Amen. To take some time, carve some time out of your busy lives to go by and pay him a visit. Go by to just let him know we love him, know that we care for him, drop a card, let him know you're praying for him. And it's not all that much, but when you're Shannon lying in a hospital and you can't go anywhere and you can't do anything, that little bit can total up to a pretty good bit in the whole realm of things. And here's this, and I think this is one of the most important things, and I don't want to forget this. I want to turn your attention to 2 Samuel 15. Because sometimes in a situation like this, and I want to communicate this to Shannon, Shannon needs to get a handle on this. He needs to grasp this, as we all need to grasp this basic thing. Gene and Dennis, this is for you, this is for me, this is for all of us. Sometimes we get in these bad situations, overpowering situations, up against the wall, nothing we can do but just wait and see. And we need to maintain this attitude. In 2 Samuel 15, David's son Absalom had turned against him and had seized the reins of power. So David and those who were faithful with David were literally running for their lives. And as David was fleeing the city of Jerusalem, the priests and the Levites came with him, bearing the ark of the covenant of God that belonged in the house of God. They were out there taking it with David's host. And in verse 25, the king said unto Zadok, "Carry back the ark of God into the city. If I shall find favor in the eyes of the Lord, He will bring me again and show me both it and His habitation. But if He say thus, I have no delight in thee." David, you annoy me. You don't please me. I don't like you. I might love you, but I don't like you. I have no delight in you. Behold, David said, here am I, let him do to me as seemeth good unto him. You know what that is? That's what James talks about. That's what Peter talks about. It's humbling yourself under the mighty hand of God. If God doesn't delight in me, He's God. Let Him do what seemeth Him good. That's humble submission to a difficult situation. And we all know the outcome. Absalom's efforts met with destruction, and David was restored to his kingdom. We have not yet seen what the Lord might do. Maybe the Lord is waiting that He may be gracious. He's waiting to teach us. He's waiting to bring Shannon to the place where Shannon can say this: that if the Lord does not delight in me, let Him do to me what seemeth Him good. What a humbling of himself. You know, there was a man that David showed kindness to in keeping with the covenant that he had made with Jonathan, Saul's son. They were best of friends. And Jonathan knew that David was slated to be the next king of Israel after the collapse of his father's dynasty. He knew that even though the throne, by the normal order of things, would have been his in the dynasty of Saul, he understood Saul's dynasty was over. The throne would never be his. It would belong to David. And he said, just swear to me, David, when you get in power, you'll show kindness to my seed. Amen. And David did. Amen. And after David got in power, he sent out an inquiry if there was any of Saul's seed, any of Jonathan's seed left, and he had one son left, and his name was Mephibosheth, and he was crippled in his feet. And David sought him out and brought him to where he was living, and he let him eat at his table as one of his sons. Restored him his inheritance, and Mephibosheth ate at David's table as one of his sons. Well, when David had to flee in the uprising with Absalom, Mephibosheth got left behind, and he was slandered. His servant told him that he said, now the kingdom will return to the house of Saul. That's not what happened. He was being slandered by his servant, who wanted to get Mephibosheth's inheritance for himself. He thought he saw a good chance to get his inheritance for himself. So anyway, when David was coming back after he had fled from Absalom, he was coming back. I'm trying to find, because I had not planned to talk about this at all, but I want to talk about what Mephibosheth said when, here it is. I knew where it was on the page, 2 Samuel 19. I want you to hear this story when Absalom's forces were defeated and it was time for David to return to Jerusalem and resume his duties as king. We read in verse 24 of 2 Samuel 19, "And Mephibosheth, the son of Saul, came down to meet the king, and had neither dressed his feet, nor trimmed his beard, nor washed his clothes, from the day the king departed until the day the king came again in peace." You see, when things are going along normally, and it's a good idea to dress your feet, if you got a beard, trim it and wash your clothes. Because when people go around not washing their clothes, not keeping trim, not keeping their bodies up, that's a sign of depression. A sign something's wrong. And it came to pass, when he was come to Jerusalem to meet the king, that the king said unto him, "Wherefore wentest thou not with me, Mephibosheth?" And he answered, "My lord, O king, my servant deceived me, for thy servant said, I'll saddle me an ass, that I may ride thereon and go to the king, because thy servant is lame. And he hath slandered thy servant unto my lord the king. But my lord the king is as an angel of God. Do therefore what is good in thine eyes. For all my father's house were but dead men before my lord the king. Yet thou didst set thy servant among them to eat at thine own table. What right therefore have I yet to cry any more unto the king? You have been good to me beyond anything I ever deserved. And so I don't have any claim to ask anything else." Now that's what I call humility. Humility. And maybe things like this happen so that we can learn to develop this mindset of humility and complete surrender and submission to God, so that we can say with Job, as he said in Job 13:15, "Though he slay me, yet will I trust him. Let him do the worst. Let him take my life. If he sends me down into some horrible, painful death, may I go down saying, I believe that thou art, and that thou art a rewarder of them that diligently seek thee. Thou art God. Jesus Christ is thy Son. Let me shout it out from a stake while I'm burning in flames, as martyrs have done." When that has been their end, because they believe what we believe and enjoy hearing preached in a comfortable building with air conditioning. Things like this may come into our lives so that we can come to this mindset. If he delight not in me, let him do what seemeth him good. Though he slay me, yet will I trust him. What right have I, considering all the goodness I have received, to ask one kindness more? And you see, when we come down and we grovel in the dust of humility like that, then listen to this. In 1 Peter 5, 6 and 7, or 5, 1 Peter 5, 5. "Likewise, ye younger, submit yourselves unto the elder. Yea, all of you be subject one to another, and be clothed with humility. For God resisteth the proud, and giveth grace to the humble. Humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, that he may exalt you." Now notice, he didn't say right away. He didn't say right away. "In due time, casting all your care upon him, for he careth for you." Who knows? Who knows? We read of these people over in, and I'll be done here quickly. We read of these people here in Hebrews chapter 11. We talk about how bad we have it. Yeah. We read here in verse 36, "Others had trial of cruel mockings and scourgings, moreover of bonds and imprisonment." Shannon's experiencing a form of bond and imprisonment. He's not the first Christian. I mean, he's in a comfortable place compared to where some of God's people have had to be placed or have been placed. In prison cells with a bucket to defecate in that's allowed to run over. Eating this soup that might have one little trace of protein in it to barely keep them alive. Reduced to skin and bones. as some have experienced. One fellow was in a Russian prison, not Russian, I think he was Bulgaria, I believe was the country, or Romania. He was in some prison for his faith, and they tortured that man, and they brought him out. They thought they could break him by putting a gun to his head and threatening to shoot. And he said the whole time he was standing there thinking, oh, just one more minute and I'm going to be with Jesus. Just one more minute and I'm out of this. And he said when that guy didn't pull the trigger, he was so let down. He had to fight bitterness against God for not letting that man pull that trigger. They were stoned. Can you imagine how much that would hurt? Break all these bones before it gets to this one, and it'd take a big rock to break this hard head. And they were stoned, sawn asunder. Could you imagine? Sawn asunder, tempted, slain with the sword, wandered about in sheepskins and goatskins, being destitute, afflicted, tormented, of whom the world was not worthy. They wandered in deserts and in mountains and in dens and caves of the earth. And these all, having obtained a good report through faith, received not the promise. And some of these people in those horrid conditions went to their death. Well, what was the promise? That if they'd humble themselves under the mighty hand of God, He would exalt them in due time. Think about it. You go down to a martyr's death. You go down to a martyr's death. And as you breathe out, there stands the chariot of God and the holy angels. They pick your soul up and place it in that chariot. And that thing turns around and whizzes through the galaxies. And you pass sun, moon, stars, and galaxies at an unbelievable speed in a chariot of angels and deposit it at the feet of Jesus in the throne room of God. I'd consider from here to there, I'd consider that being exalted in due time, wouldn't you?
You got that right.
Maybe that's the exaltation. Or maybe something else. We have to let God decide that. We have to let Him do that which seemeth good in His sight. Well, children, that's my hodgepodge, a little here, a little there. What comes up, what comes out. I don't know what you call this message, Joe. A hodgepodge of hope, I guess. Thank you for your patient attention. I hope in some way you got a blessing out of that. Something there to feed your soul.